I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, Jay said during one of their long conversations about rebuilding trust. Don't expect you to simply move back into my home and resume relationship like nothing happened. But I'm asking, begging if necessary, for chance to prove that the man I was with you is who I still am beneath the fragments and confusion. That our connection wasn't just memory I lost but fundamental truth about who we are together. I never stopped loving you, Bella admitted. Even when I was angry, even when I thought you'd chosen Stella over me, even when I believed you'd forgotten me completely, I never stopped loving you, Jay. But I can't go back to dangerous life where our daughter becomes leverage for your enemies. Can't accept constant threat assessment as normal existence. Bella Martinez had learned early in life that stability was a myth her mother refused to believe in. By the time she turned 22, she'd lived in 14 different cities, attended 9 different schools, and watched her mother marry and divorce 3 different men with the kind of casual inevitability that most people reserved for changing hairstyles. Each marriage started with promises of forever and ended with packed suitcases and Bella's increasingly numb acceptance that home was a concept that existed for other people. People whose mothers didn't chase happiness like it was something that could be captured through different men in different cities with different lives that never quite fit. The latest relocation had brought them to Metropolitan City, where her mother had married husband number 4. A quiet accountant named Robert Chin who seemed genuinely kind in ways that made Bella suspicious because kindness in her experience was usually prelude to disappointment. They'd moved into Robert's modest house in a neighborhood that was neither wealthy nor poor, just comfortably middle class in ways that felt foreign after years of bouncing between her mother's ambitious attempts at marrying upward and the inevitable financial crashes that followed each divorce. Bella had been trying to navigate her new reality, new city, new stepfather, new college where she knew absolutely no one, when the collision happened that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her entire life. She'd been rushing across campus, her arms full of textbooks and her attention focused on the schedule she was trying to memorize, when she crashed directly into someone coming from the opposite direction with equal lack of awareness. The impact sent her sprawling, her books scattering across the pavement, and she looked up from the ground with automatic apology already forming on her lips. What she saw made the words die unspoken. A man in an immaculate white suit now decorated with the coffee that had been in her travel mug, the dark liquid spreading across expensive fabric with the kind of irreversible staining that made Bella's heart sink with immediate dread. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, scrambling to her feet with the kind of panicked energy that came from knowing she'd just ruined something that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe combined. "I wasn't watching where I was going, I didn't see you, I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing," the man said, his voice smooth and controlled despite the disaster spreading across his suit. He was studying her with dark eyes that held intelligence and something else she couldn't quite identify. Assessment, maybe, or calculation. He was handsome in the kind of refined way that suggested money and power, probably mid-30s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command and the kind of controlled stillness that made Bella's instincts scream danger despite his calm demeanor. "But your suit," Bella protested, her hands fluttering helplessly. "It's ruined and it looks expensive and I can pay for cleaning? Or replacement? I don't have much money right now but I can set up a payment plan or—" "Bella Martinez," the man interrupted, and the fact that he knew her name made her breath catch with alarm. "Yes, I know who you are. Your student ID is on the ground beside your scattered belongings. Very observant of me." He bent to retrieve the ID in several of her books, his movements fluid despite the wet suit, and handed them to her with courtesy that felt oddly formal given their circumstances. Up close, Bella could see the quality of his ruined clothing, custom-tailored, probably Italian, definitely worth more than several months of her part-time job income. "I'm Jay Martins," he said, producing a business card from his jacket pocket with the kind of smooth efficiency that suggested he'd done this thousands of times. "And while I appreciate your offer to compensate me for the suit, I suspect we both know that the cost would be prohibitive for a college student working part-time at the campus bookstore." "How do you know where I work?" Bella demanded, her alarm crystallizing into something closer to fear. "Your name tag is visible in your bag," Jay replied with slight smile. Again very observant. "I'm not stalking you, Miss Martinez. I'm simply someone who pays attention to details." He glanced down at his ruined suit with expression that suggested mild annoyance rather than genuine anger. This was custom-made in Milan. The replacement cost would be approximately $15,000, not including the shirt and shoes that were also damaged in our collision. "So unless you have access to funds I'm not aware of, I'd suggest we consider alternative arrangements for compensation." $15,000. The number made Bella's knees weak with the kind of panic that came from knowing she'd just destroyed something worth more than her mother's car. "I don't have that kind of money," she whispered. "I don't have any money really. I'm barely covering tuition and—" "I'm aware," Jay interrupted gently. "Which is why I'm suggesting alternative arrangements. Take my card. Think about it. And when you're ready to discuss how you might work off your debt to me, call the number. We'll arrange something that doesn't require you to bankrupt yourself paying for my wardrobe." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Martinez, don't try to clean the suit yourself. You'll only make it worse. And don't lose the card. I'll be expecting your call." Then he was gone, disappeared into the campus crowd with the kind of smooth exit that left Bella standing frozen with his business card clutched in her shaking hand and the growing certainty that she'd just made a mistake that was going to cost her significantly more than $15,000. The card was simple but expensive. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, contact information that included personal cell number rather than just business line. J. Martin's Private Investments, with an address in the wealthiest district of the city and a tagline that read, "Specialized solutions for unique problems." Bella shoved the card into her bag and tried to forget about the encounter. Tried to convince herself that J. Martin's would simply write off the loss and forget about the clumsy college student who'd ruined his suit. Tried to focus on her classes and her job and her attempts to build some kind of stable life in yet another new city. But that night, lying in bed in Robert's house while her mother laughed downstairs with her new husband, Bella pulled out the ruined coffee mug that had caused the entire disaster and made the catastrophic decision to try to save Jay's suit herself. She'd kept it, had picked it up from where he'd draped it over a bench before leaving, with some vague idea that maybe professional cleaning could salvage it and reduce her debt. She filled her bathroom sink with cold water and expensive detergent, carefully submerged the jacket, and watched in growing horror as the coffee stains spread rather than diminished. The fabric started to warp under her amateur treatment. The lining began separating from the outer material. What had been a salvageable stain became irreversible destruction, and Bella finally acknowledged that she'd just made everything exponentially worse. She spent the next 3 days in state of low-grade panic, jumping every time her phone rang, avoiding campus areas where she might encounter Jay again, and trying to calculate how she could possibly earn $15,000, now probably more given the additional damage, without dropping out of school or asking her mother for help that would come with judgment and lectures about responsibility. On the 4th day, J. Martin's returned. Bella was working her shift at the campus bookstore, organizing textbooks with the kind of mechanical focus that came from trying not to think about her growing problems, when she felt that familiar prickling awareness that meant someone was watching her. She turned and found Jay standing at the end of her aisle, dressed in different expensive suit but with the same controlled presence that made her pulse spike with fear and something else she didn't want to examine too closely. "Miss Martinez," he said with slight smile. "You didn't call. And according to my sources, you also attempted to clean the suit yourself despite my explicit instructions not to do so. I'm assuming that went poorly?" "I'm sorry," Bella said automatically, the apology she'd been rehearsing for days finally escaping. "I thought maybe I could save it, reduce the cost, make it less." She stopped, recognizing that explanations were pointless given the destruction she'd caused. "I made it worse. I know I did. And I don't have the money to pay you back and I don't know what to do and I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing," Jay said, echoing his words from their first encounter. "Apologies without action are meaningless. What I need from you is solution, not endless regret." He moved closer, and Bella found herself backing up until she hit the bookshelf behind her, effectively trapped by his proximity and the intensity of his gaze. He wasn't threatening, wasn't touching her or even standing inappropriately close, but something about his focused attention made her feel simultaneously terrified and strangely safe in ways she couldn't articulate. "I have a proposition," Jay continued, his voice dropping to something more intimate despite their public setting. "A way for you to work off your debt that doesn't require cash payment or disruption of your education. I need someone at my residence. Someone to provide presence, warmth, the kind of domestic atmosphere that my home currently lacks. In exchange, your debt would be forgiven and you'd receive modest salary for your time." "You want me to work as your housekeeper?" Bella asked, trying to understand what he was proposing. "Not housekeeper," Jay corrected. "I have staff for cleaning and cooking. What I need is someone who lives in my home, who makes it feel less like expensive museum and more like actual residence where a person exists. Someone whose presence reminds me that there's more to life than business and strategy and the kind of isolated existence I've been maintaining." The proposition was strange enough that Bella's suspicion immediately flared. "Why me? Why not hire someone through an agency or... Because you need the opportunity and I need someone who isn't there because they want access to my wealth or connections, Jay interrupted. You literally destroyed my suit through accident rather than design. You attempted to fix it despite having no idea what you were doing. You're clearly desperate enough to consider proposals from strangers but not so desperate that you've already agreed without asking questions. Those qualities suggest someone I could trust in my home without worrying about ulterior motives. I don't know you, Bella protested. Don't know anything about you except that you wear expensive suits and apparently need domestic presence badly enough to offer employment to random college students who crash into you. True, Jay acknowledged. Which is why I'm going to give you time to think about it. Research me if you want. My business dealings are all public record. Talk to your family about the offer. And when you're ready, call me. The proposition stands for 1 week. After that, I'll pursue payment through more traditional legal channels that will absolutely bankrupt you. He handed her another business card, this one with address written on the back in neat handwriting. My home. If you decide to accept, come there this Friday at noon. Bring whatever you need for extended stay. And Miss Martinez? His eyes held hers with intensity that made her breath catch. I promise you'll be safe in my home. I have many faults, but forcing women into situations they don't consent to isn't among them. Then he was gone again, and Bella was left clutching another business card while her co-workers stared with open curiosity about the well-dressed man who'd been talking to her with such focused attention. That night, Bella made the mistake of telling her mother about the encounter and the proposition. She'd hoped for advice, maybe even support or concern about the strangeness of the offer. What she got instead was her mother's immediate enthusiasm that made Bella's stomach twist with familiar dread. Take it, her mother said without hesitation, her eyes lighting up with the same opportunistic gleam that had preceded every disastrous marriage. A wealthy man offering to forgive your debt in exchange for simply living in his home? That's incredible opportunity, Bella. You'd be stupid to refuse. It's strange, Mom, Bella protested. Normal people don't offer employment to people who destroy their suits. Normal people sue or demand payment or... Normal people aren't wealthy enough to make those kinds of offers, her mother interrupted. This Jay Martins, I looked him up after you mentioned his name. He's serious money, Bella. Private investment firm, connections throughout the city, properties worth millions. If he's offering you a way to clear your debt and earn salary just for existing in his home, you take it. No questions asked. But why does he want someone living there? Bella asked. It doesn't make sense unless... Unless he's lonely, Robert interjected quietly, speaking for the first time since the conversation started. Wealthy people often are. They have everything material wealth can provide but lack the kind of simple human connection that makes a house feel like home. If he's offering fair compensation for your presence without demanding anything inappropriate, it might be legitimate offer rather than trap. Or it's the beginning of something dangerous that Bella's too naive to recognize, her mother countered with the kind of casual cruelty that had characterized most of their relationship. But honestly, what choice does she have? She destroyed something worth more than we could pay back in years. Either she takes his offer or she spends the next decade paying off debt through legal channels. At least his way, she gets something out of it. The casual dismissal of any concern for Bella's safety, the immediate calculation of advantage versus risk, the complete absence of maternal protection. It was painfully familiar pattern that reminded Bella exactly how little her mother valued her well-being compared to potential opportunities for advancement. I'll think about it, Bella said, standing up from the dinner table with her appetite completely gone. I have until Friday to decide. She spent the next 3 days researching Jay Martins obsessively, trying to find some indication of whether his offer was legitimate opportunity or elaborate trap. What she found was frustratingly ambiguous. Extensive business success with no obvious criminal connections, charitable donations to legitimate causes, property ownership that suggested serious wealth, and absolutely no personal information about relationships or private life beyond basic biographical data. He was Ghost. Successful ghost who moved through society's upper echelons with ease but maintained almost pathological privacy about anything beyond professional accomplishments. No scandals, no controversies, nothing that would explain why he needed to hire someone to provide domestic presence rather than simply dating or marrying like normal wealthy people seeking companionship. Friday came too quickly, and Bella found herself standing outside the address Jay had written on his card with her duffel bag packed with clothes and the growing certainty that she was making either the best or worst decision of her life. The house, mansion really, was exactly what she'd expected based on her research. Sprawling estate in the wealthiest district, surrounded by gates and professional landscaping, looking more like museum than actual residence where people lived normal lives. She pressed the intercom button and waited, her heart hammering with anxiety that had nothing to do with physical fear and everything to do with the fundamental recognition that accepting this position meant stepping into a world she didn't understand, with man who was either savior or predator, and she had no reliable way to determine which. "Miss Martinez?" Jay's voice came through the speaker with warmth that surprised her. "Right on time. Come up to the main house. I'll meet you at the entrance." The gates opened with smooth mechanical precision, and Bella walked up the long driveway feeling like she was approaching something inevitable. Jay was waiting at the massive front doors, dressed more casually than she'd seen him before but still radiating that same controlled presence that made her pulse race. "You came," he said, and something in his voice suggested genuine pleasure rather than mere satisfaction at getting his way. "I wasn't certain you would. Your mother was enthusiastic about the arrangement when I spoke with her yesterday, but you struck me as someone who values independence enough to potentially refuse despite the financial pressure." "You spoke with my mother?" Bella asked, alarm bells ringing at the revelation. "She called me," Jay clarified. "Used the number on the card you apparently showed her. Wanted to discuss the terms of your employment, ensure you'd be adequately compensated and protected. I assured her that my intentions were entirely appropriate and that you'd be free to leave at any time if the arrangement didn't work for you." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Come in. Let me show you your quarters and explain exactly what I'm hoping this arrangement will provide for both of us." The interior was exactly as intimidating as Bella had feared: marble floors, expensive artwork, furniture that looked like it belonged in design magazines rather than actual homes. Everything was perfect, pristine, absolutely devoid of the kind of lived-in warmth that made spaces feel welcoming rather than threatening. "It looks like a museum," Bella said before she could stop herself. "Exactly," Jay agreed with slight smile. "That's precisely the problem I'm hoping you'll solve. My residence is professionally maintained, expensively furnished, and completely lacking in any indication that an actual person lives here rather than simply existing between business obligations." He led her through corridors and rooms that all maintained the same sterile perfection, finally stopping at a door that opened to reveal a suite that was larger than Bella's entire family's current living space. "Your quarters," Jay said. "Private bathroom, sitting area, bedroom. You're welcome to decorate however you prefer. In fact, I'd encourage it. The goal is for you to make this feel like home rather than temporary housing." "What exactly do you want from me?" Bella finally asked, voicing the question that had been building since his initial proposition. "Really? Because this," she gestured at the luxury surrounding them. "This isn't normal. This isn't how employment works. So what's the actual arrangement?" Jay's expression sobered, and he met her eyes with directness that suggested genuine honesty. "I need someone living here who makes this feel less empty. Someone whose presence reminds me that homes are meant to be inhabited rather than simply maintained. Someone who'll eat breakfast in the kitchen, read in the library, exist in ways that transform this from expensive property into actual residence." "That's it?" Bella asked skeptically. "You're paying me to just exist in your home?" "That's it," Jay confirmed. "Though I should clarify, I'll need your presence for 6 months. Long enough to establish patterns, to break the isolation I've fallen into, to remember what it feels like to share space with another person without constant calculations about business advantage or strategic positioning." He pulled out a document from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. "Standard employment contract. 6 months, modest salary, room and board provided, freedom to continue your education and maintain outside relationships. And one critical clause." Jay's voice dropped lower, more intense. "I will never touch you without explicit consent. Will never enter your private quarters without invitation. Will never pressure you into anything beyond the presence we've already discussed. You're safe here, Bella. Safer than you probably realize. Because whatever else I might be, I don't hurt people who haven't chosen to enter my world voluntarily." Bella read through the contract carefully, finding exactly what he described with no hidden clauses or concerning requirements. The salary was generous, more than she'd make working part-time for the entire 6 months. The terms were clear. And the protection clause about consent was repeated multiple times with emphatic language that suggested genuine commitment. "Why me?" she asked again, needing to understand before she signed away 6 months of her life to a stranger who seemed simultaneously dangerous and protective. "Really? Why not hire through an agency or find someone through normal channels?" "Because," Jay said quietly, "when you crashed into me, when you looked at me with that combination of terror and determination to make things right, I saw someone who was honest. Genuinely authentically honest in ways that people in my world have forgotten how to be. And I realized I wanted that honesty in my home more than I wanted professional distance or strategic advantage. He stepped closer, and Bella found herself holding perfectly still as he reached past her to point at a specific clause in the contract. That's the termination provision. You can leave at any time with 2 weeks' notice. Can walk away if this arrangement becomes uncomfortable or if you decide it's not what you thought you were agreeing to. I'm not trapping you, Bella. I'm offering you opportunity to clear your debt and earn money for education while providing me with something I apparently need badly enough to make extremely unusual employment offer. Bella signed the contract with shaking hands and the growing certainty that she just agreed to something that was going to fundamentally change her life in ways that went far beyond simple employment. Jay witnessed her signature with expression that combined satisfaction and something else that might have been relief, then carefully stored the document in a secure location. "Welcome home, Bella Martinez," he said with slight smile that made her breath catch. "For the next 6 months, you're mine, in the most appropriate, consensual, absolutely proper meaning of that phrase. Try not to destroy any more of my suits and we'll get along perfectly." The casual possessiveness in his words should have alarmed her. Should have triggered every warning instinct about inappropriate employer-employee dynamics. Instead, Bella felt something settle in her chest that might have been anticipation or might have been the first stirrings of something far more dangerous than simple employment arrangement. She was living with Jay Martins. Had agreed to inhabit his space, to make his house feel like home, to provide presence and warmth for 6 months in exchange for debt forgiveness and salary. It was business arrangement. Professional relationship. Absolutely nothing more complicated than employer and employee existing in shared space. But as Jay showed her the rest of the mansion, the library where she could study, the kitchen where she was welcome to cook or eat whatever she wanted, the grounds where she could walk or exercise, Bella couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something infinitely more intimate than simple domestic presence. She'd agreed to live with a man who watched her with fascination and intensity, who'd apparently been willing to forgive massive debt just to have her existing in his space, who promised never to touch her without consent but looked at her like he was simultaneously trying to memorize every detail and fighting the urge to close distance between them. 6 months. She could survive 6 months of anything. Could maintain professional boundaries despite living in proximity to man who made her pulse race with combination of fear and attraction she absolutely could not afford to examine too closely. What Bella didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed, was that Jay Martins had been watching her for significantly longer than their collision would suggest. Had been studying her patterns, learning her habits, making calculated decisions about whether she was the kind of person who could be trusted in his home without becoming liability or threat. And what neither of them knew was that 6 months was going to be nowhere near enough time for the connection building between them. That professional boundaries were going to blur into something infinitely more complicated. That the promise of never touching without consent was going to become the most exquisite torture of both their lives. The debt had bound them together. But what would keep them together went far deeper than financial obligation or employment contracts. It went to the heart of what it meant to be seen, really truly seen, by someone who looked past surfaces and recognized the truth of who you were beneath every protective layer you'd built. And that kind of recognition was significantly more dangerous than any debt could ever be. Living in Jay Martin's mansion was like existing inside beautiful prison where all the bars were made of luxury and expectation. Bella settled into her quarters with the kind of careful boundary establishment that came from understanding she was inhabiting someone else's space rather than truly making it home. She attended her classes, completed her assignments in Jay's extensive library, and tried to maintain the professional distance that their contract technically required despite the growing intimacy of sharing space with someone who studied her every movement with fascination that made her skin prickle with awareness. The first month passed in strange domesticity. Jay worked from his home office most days, emerging occasionally to find Bella reading or studying or simply existing in the spaces he'd opened to her. He never violated her privacy, never entered her quarters without invitation, never touched her beyond occasional accidental contact when passing in hallways or reaching for the same book in the library. But the restraint felt deliberate rather than natural, like he was fighting constant urge to close distance between them and only succeeding through sheer force of will. "You're always watching me," Bella finally said one evening when she'd caught him staring for the 3rd time during dinner. They'd fallen into pattern of eating together when both were home, sitting at opposite ends of his massive dining table like strangers pretending at intimacy. "Like you're studying something you don't quite understand." "I am," Jay admitted without embarrassment. "You're fascinating to me. The way you approach problems, the way you organize your thoughts, The way you exist in my space like you're simultaneously comfortable and constantly prepared to flee. I can't figure out if you're adapting well to this arrangement or simply very good at hiding your discomfort. Why does it matter? Bella asked. Because, Jay said, setting down his fork with deliberate precision, I made promise that you'd be safe here. That I'd never pressure you or make you uncomfortable. And I'm finding it increasingly difficult to honor that promise when every interaction we have makes me want to know you better, understand you more deeply, close the distance I swore I'd maintain. The admission hung between them, weighted with implications that Bella wasn't sure she was ready to examine. The contract says 6 months, she reminded him. Then I'm free to leave with my debt cleared and enough money saved to finish my education without working 3 jobs. That was the arrangement. I know what the arrangement was, Jay replied, his voice dropping to something more intense. I'm the one who wrote it. But knowing the terms and accepting their limitations are proving to be very different things, Bella. Because what I thought I needed when I offered you this position, simple presence, domestic warmth, another person existing in my space, isn't what I actually want anymore. What do you want? Bella asked, though part of her already knew the answer and was terrified of hearing it articulated. You, Jay said simply. Not your presence or your warmth or your ability to make my house feel less empty. Just you, the person you are when you think no one's watching, the intelligence you try to hide behind casual responses, the strength you've developed from being dragged through your mother's constantly changing life. I want to know you, Bella. Really know you. And that's significantly more complicated than our contract ever anticipated. Before Bella could respond, before she could articulate the complicated tangle of fear and attraction and recognition that his words triggered, Jay's phone rang with tone that made his expression shift instantly from vulnerable to coldly professional. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward his office. We'll continue this conversation later. That conversation never happened. Because what Bella didn't know, what Jay had been carefully concealing, was that his private investments company was actually a sophisticated front for significantly more dangerous operations. Money laundering for organizations that moved through legitimate society, strategic acquisitions that destabilized competitors, information brokering that existed in spaces where legality was matter of interpretation rather than clear guidelines. He wasn't criminal in the traditional sense, but he operated in gray areas that made traditional morality largely irrelevant. And someone in those gray spaces had decided Jay needed to be reminded of his place in the hierarchy. The attack came 3 weeks later, during one of the rare evenings when Jay had left the mansion to attend business meeting that apparently required in-person attendance. Bella was alone in the library working on research paper, when she heard sounds that didn't belong. Footsteps in corridors that should have been empty, voices speaking in tones that suggested coordination rather than legitimate presence. Her first instinct was to hide. Her second was to call Jay. But before she could do either, 3 men entered the library with guns drawn and expressions that made Bella's blood freeze with immediate recognition of danger. Where is he? The first man demanded, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins. Where is Jay Martins? I don't know, Bella stammered, pressing herself against the bookshelf behind her. He left hours ago. I don't know where he went or when he's coming back. Lying, the man interrupted, moving closer with predatory focus. You live here. Sleep here. Probably fuck him regularly despite whatever story he tells about professional boundaries. So stop pretending you don't know his movements and tell us where we can find him. I'm not lying, Bella insisted, genuine terror making her voice shake. I'm just employee. I don't know about his business or his schedule or anything beyond the work I do here. The slap came without warning, hard enough to snap her head to the side and fill her mouth with the copper taste of blood. Try again, the man said coldly. And this time, convince me that keeping his secrets is worth whatever we're about to do to you. What followed was nightmare of questions Bella couldn't answer, escalating violence as her interrogators became increasingly frustrated with her genuine ignorance, and the growing certainty that she was going to die in Jay's library surrounded by books and the ruins of whatever illusion she'd maintained about the safety of her employment arrangement. She was barely conscious, her face swelling and her ribs screaming with pain from kicks she hadn't been fast enough to avoid, when she heard new sound, gunfire, rapid and professional, followed by screams and bodies hitting the floor with wet thuds that suggested lethal force. Through her blurred vision, she saw Jay entering the library like a avenging angel, his expression absolutely cold as he eliminated the men who'd broken into his home with efficiency that suggested extensive combat training. The violence was over in seconds. Jay crossed to where Bella was crumpled against the bookshelf, his hands incredibly gentle as they assessed her injuries despite having just killed 3 people with brutal precision. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice shaking slightly with barely controlled fury. "You're safe now, Bella. I swear to God you're safe." "They were looking for you," Bella managed through split lip. "Wanted to know where you were, what you were doing." "I know," Jay interrupted, carefully lifting her with strength that suggested regular physical training. "I know what they wanted. And I know that you almost died because someone decided to send me message through attacking what's mine. That's on me, Bella. That's my fault and I'm so fucking sorry." He carried her to his private quarters, not her guest suite but his actual bedroom, and spent the next hour tending her injuries with medical supplies that suggested he'd dealt with violence before. His hands were steady despite the rage she could see building in his expression, his touch gentle despite the lethal capability he just demonstrated. "Why?" Bella finally asked when the pain had faded to manageable levels thanks to medications he'd administered. "Why would someone attack your home to send you message? What kind of business are you really in, Jay?" "The kind that operates in spaces where violence is occupational hazard," Jay replied grimly. "The kind that makes enemies who think attacking my home and the people under my protection is acceptable way to gain leverage. The kind that I should have warned you about before offering you position that put you directly in line of fire." "You're not just investor," Bella said, understanding crystallizing despite her foggy mind. "No," Jay agreed. "I'm significantly more complicated and infinitely more dangerous than that professional title suggests. And you've just learned exactly why I live alone in mansion designed like fortress. Because people like me don't get to have normal relationships or domestic peace or anyone in our lives who isn't either protected by our organization or too dangerous to be threatened effectively." "I should leave," Bella said, though the words felt hollow given her current physical state. "You should," Jay acknowledged. "Should terminate our contract and get as far from me as possible before my enemies decide that hurting you is an effective way to hurt me. Should recognize that staying here means accepting level of danger that goes far beyond anything our employment agreement ever contemplated." He leaned closer, his hand cupping her uninjured cheek with tenderness that contrasted beautifully with the violence he displayed earlier. "But if you stay, Bella, if you choose to remain in my home despite everything you've just learned, then I need you to understand something. I will protect you with everything I have. Every resource, every connection, every bit of lethal capability I've developed over years of surviving in a world that eats people who show weakness. You'll be mine in ways that go far beyond employment contracts or professional boundaries. You'll be under my protection, in my care, part of my life in ways that make you target and sanctuary simultaneously." "That's not what I signed up for," Bella whispered. "I know," Jay said. "Which is why I'm giving you choice. Leave with your debt forgiven and generous severance that will cover your education and then some. Or stay, knowing that staying means accepting everything. The danger, the protection, the fact that I'm not going to be able to maintain professional distance anymore because tonight proved I can't keep you safe while pretending you're just employee I hired for domestic presence." Bella should have left. Should have recognized that his world was infinitely more dangerous than anything she'd experienced. Should have understood that staying meant accepting risks that went far beyond anything rational person would consider reasonable. But looking at Jay, at the man who just killed to protect her, who was offering her choice despite clearly wanting her to stay, who'd been restraining himself for months out of respect for boundaries that had just been violently shattered, Bella found herself unable to articulate the sensible choice. "I'll stay," she heard herself say. "For now. Until I figure out if this is where I'm supposed to be or if I'm just responding to trauma and adrenaline in ways that will look insane when I'm thinking clearly." Something fierce and possessive flashed in Jay's eyes, and before Bella could process what was happening, he was kissing her, gentle despite his obvious desire, careful of her injuries, absolutely devastating in its intensity. She responded without thinking, her hands fisting in his shirt while he cradled her face like she was simultaneously precious and potentially fragile. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jay rested his forehead against hers with expression that combined satisfaction and something that looked disturbingly like relief. "You're mine now," he said quietly. "Not employee. Not temporary presence. Mine in ways that matter beyond contracts or professional arrangements. And I'm going to make sure everyone in my world understands that touching you means dying. Slowly. In ways that make tonight's violence look merciful." The possessiveness should have alarmed her. Should have triggered concerns about healthy relationship dynamics and appropriate boundaries. Instead, Bella felt something settle in her chest that might have been safety or might have been the first stirrings of love for a man who was simultaneously dangerous and protective in ways that went beyond anything she'd known before. They moved carefully into new dynamic over the following weeks. Jay taught her basic self-defense and weapons handling, his hands on her body no longer restrained by professional distance but still careful of her healing injuries. He showed her how to recognize threats and avoid danger, his lessons interspersed with kisses that grew progressively less gentle as her physical recovery progressed. He introduced her to the parts of his business that operated in legitimate spaces while carefully shielding her from operations that existed in gray areas where her innocence could become liability. And slowly, with building inevitability that neither seemed able to resist, professional boundaries dissolved into genuine intimacy. They shared meals and conversations and eventually beds, their physical relationship developing with the kind of intense focus that came from months of denied attraction finally finding expression. Jay was careful, patient, absolutely determined to ensure Bella's consent at every stage despite the barely contained hunger that made his restraint visible achievement. "I've never felt this for anyone," he admitted one night when they were tangled together in his bed, her head resting on his chest while his fingers traced idle patterns on her skin. "Never wanted someone enough to risk showing them who I really am. Never trusted anyone enough to let them into my actual life rather than the professional persona I maintain for everyone else." "I love you," Bella said, the admission escaping before she could question its wisdom. "I know that's probably stupid given how little time we've actually been together, but I love you, Jay. Love who you are when the masks come down. Love the way you protect without smothering. Love the contradiction of someone who can be lethal and gentle depending on what the situation requires." "I love you too," Jay replied, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. "Have loved you since you crashed into me and looked at me with that combination of terror and determination. Have been falling deeper every day since you agreed to live here. Have been fighting the urge to claim you completely because I was terrified of becoming exactly the kind of dangerous man you should run from." They should have been happy. Should have settled into their relationship with the kind of comfortable intimacy that came from finding someone who understood you completely. Should have had time to build something stable before reality intervened. But Jay's world didn't allow for stable happiness. And the rivalry he'd mentioned, the one that had sent attackers to his home, was escalating in ways that would ultimately destroy everything they'd built together. The public humiliation happened at a charity gala that Jay had been obligated to attend, one of the events where his legitimate business persona required social appearance. He'd brought Bella as his date, wanting to show her off to the world that usually only saw his professional mask. They'd been enjoying the evening, dancing, conversation, the kind of normal relationship moment that felt precious given how rare it was in their complicated life. Then Marcus Volkov appeared, rival power broker who'd apparently decided that Jay's influence needed to be challenged publicly. The confrontation started verbally, accusations and counter-accusations delivered with the kind of controlled hostility that made surrounding guests back away nervously. But when Volkov made comment about Bella, suggestion about her being hired help who'd been promoted through services that had nothing to do with professional competence, Jay's control snapped. The knife appeared in his hand with practiced speed, and before security could intervene, before Bella could process what was happening, Jay had Volkov's hand pinned to the table with blade through his palm, blood spreading across white tablecloth while Volkov screamed. "Say her name again," Jay said quietly, his voice cold enough to make Bella shiver despite not being the target. "Say anything about her again, imply anything about our relationship that suggests she's anything other than the woman I love, and next time I'll aim for something significantly more vital than your hand." Security dragged Jay away. Police were called. Charges were filed and ultimately dropped through combination of legal maneuvering and pressure from people who owed Jay favors. But the damage was done. War had been officially declared, and Marcus Volkov wasn't the kind of man who forgot public humiliation. The threats escalated. Jay's business was attacked through financial manipulation and strategic pressure designed to destabilize his operations. His associates were targeted, their loyalty tested through offers and intimidation. And underneath all of it was growing pressure on Jay personally, demands that he submit to Volkov's authority or face consequences that would extend beyond simple business rivalry. Bella watched Jay become increasingly stressed, his usual control fraying under combined pressure of protecting his organization and keeping her safe in an environment that was becoming progressively more dangerous. They still found moments of intimacy, still maintained the connection that had developed between them, but tension was building towards something that would ultimately force impossible choices. The breaking point came when Bella discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling ill for weeks, exhausted in ways that went beyond stress, experiencing symptoms she'd initially attributed to the constant anxiety of living in Jay's dangerous world. The test she took in private confirmed what she'd begun to suspect, and Bella stared at the positive result with her heart hammering and her mind spinning through implications she wasn't ready to process. She was carrying Jay's child. was bound to him now in ways that went far beyond love or employment contracts or any agreement they'd made. Was bringing new life into a world where violence was occupational hazard and enemies used loved ones as leverage against people they wanted to destroy. She should have been happy. Should have felt joy at the prospect of building family with man she loved. Instead, she felt terror, absolute, overwhelming terror at the idea of giving birth to child who would become target simply by existing. "I need to tell you something," Bella said that night when Jay finally came home from dealing with another crisis in his increasingly unstable business situation. "Something that's going to change everything." "You're pregnant," Jay said before she could articulate the words, his expression shifting through emotions too quickly for her to track. "I've suspected for weeks but didn't want to pressure you into discussing it before you were ready." "How did you know?" Bella asked. "Because I pay attention to you," Jay replied, moving closer with the kind of careful approach that suggested he was uncertain of his welcome. "Pay attention to your patterns, your habits, the changes in how you move through space. And because I've been hoping, even while knowing I shouldn't, that maybe we'd created something permanent between us." "You're happy about this?" Bella asked, genuinely confused by his reaction. "Terrified," Jay corrected. "Absolutely terrified of bringing child into my world, of making them target for enemies who will absolutely use them as leverage. But also yes, happy. Because you're carrying part of both of us, physical proof of connection that goes beyond danger or professional complications. So yes, I'm happy even while being completely fucking scared of what this means." They should have had time to process the pregnancy together. Should have been able to plan for their future as family rather than just as couple navigating dangerous relationship. Should have had opportunity to build something stable before reality intervened again. But 2 days later, Stella Martins appeared at Jay's door, his ex-wife who'd left him years ago, who'd taken half his assets in brutal divorce, who he'd sworn he'd never speak to again. She was wounded, bleeding from injury to her side, claiming she'd been targeted by one of Volkov's associates and had nowhere else to go for help. Jay made the catastrophic decision to let her in. Bella watched with growing dread as Stella settled into guest quarters, as she monopolized Jay's attention with stories of continued danger, as she worked her way back into his life with practiced manipulation that made Bella's skin crawl with recognition of threat she couldn't articulate clearly enough to justify. "She still loves you," Bella finally said after a week of watching Stella orbit around Jay like she'd never left. "Or at least she loves what you represent. Safety, resources, the protection she apparently threw away when she divorced you." "She's in danger," Jay replied, exhaustion evident in his voice. "I can't turn away someone I was married to, someone who came to me for help, regardless of our history. Even if helping her means neglecting your current relationship?" Bella challenged. "Even if it means our child grows up watching you divided between past and present?" "That's not fair," Jay protested. "Neither is expecting me to watch you care for your ex-wife while I'm carrying your child," Bella countered. "I'm not asking you to abandon her completely. I'm asking you to maintain boundaries that acknowledge you're with me now, that we have future together, that she's your past regardless of current danger." But Jay, overwhelmed by combined pressure of his business crises, Volkov's escalating threats, and Stella's apparent vulnerability, made the worst possible choice. He withdrew. Pulled back from Bella emotionally while focusing on protecting Stella physically. Created distance that felt like rejection even though he swore it was just temporary stress response. And Stella, recognizing opportunity, moved into the space Bella had vacated. Reminded Jay of their history, their connection, the life they'd built before divorce had torn them apart. Suggested that maybe second chances were possible if he'd just let himself consider the possibility. Bella watched her relationship crumbling and felt powerless to stop it. Jay wouldn't listen when she tried to warn him about Stella's manipulation. Wouldn't acknowledge that his ex-wife was playing on his guilt and exhaustion to reclaim position she'd voluntarily abandoned. Wouldn't see that his withdrawal was pushing Bella away just when they should have been closest. The final breaking point came when Bella's mother called with news that her cancer Bella hadn't even known existed, had progressed beyond treatment. She had weeks, maybe days, and she wanted to see Bella before she died. "I need to go," Bella told Jay that night. "Need to be with my mom for whatever time she has left." "I'll come with you," Jay said immediately. "No," Bella refused, her voice hollow with exhaustion and pain. "You need to stay here, deal with your business crisis, protect Stella since she apparently needs you more than I do. I'll handle my mother's death on my own." "Bella, don't do this," Jay pleaded. "Don't shut me out when you're hurting." "You shut me out first," Bella interrupted. "When you let your ex-wife back into your life and our home without considering how that would affect me or our unborn child. When you chose protecting her over maintaining the relationship we'd built. So yes, I'm shutting you out now. Because I need to focus on my mother without also managing your divided attention. She left that night, went to her mother's beside, and spent 2 weeks watching the woman who'd never properly loved her fade away. Her mother's last words were apology, for the constant moving, the string of failed marriages, the casual cruelty that had characterized their relationship. But apologies couldn't erase decades of damage, and Bella found herself alone again with grief she couldn't share because the man who should have been supporting her was back home rebuilding his past with woman who'd left him once and would undoubtedly do it again. Bella didn't return to Jay's mansion after her mother's funeral. Instead, she packed her few belongings from her childhood home, what little Robert was willing to give her from her mother's estate, and disappeared. Changed her number. Withdrew from school temporarily. Cut every connection that would let Jay find her. She was done. Done with dangerous relationships and complicated men and situations that required her to accept violence and rivalry as normal aspects of existence. Done with being collateral damage and conflicts she didn't understand and hadn't chosen. She was pregnant, alone, grieving, and absolutely determined to build life that didn't require bodyguards or weapons training or accepting that the man she loved might be murdered by business rivals at any moment. What Bella didn't know was that her departure would nearly destroy Jay completely. And what neither of them knew was that fate had one more cruel twist waiting. One that would erase Jay's memory of everything they'd built together and give Stella the opportunity to rewrite their entire history according to her preferred narrative. The accident happened 2 days after Bella left, when Jay was driving alone through streets he'd navigated thousands of times. The details were unclear. Possible brake failure, possible deliberate sabotage by Volkov's organization, possibly just tragic coincidence. But the result was undeniable. Jay's car crashed into barrier at high speed, the impact severe enough to cause traumatic brain injury that left him unconscious for 3 days. When he finally woke up in the hospital, everything after his divorce from Stella was simply gone. Erased. Like the past 3 years had never happened. Like Bella had never crashed into him, never lived in his home, never loved him and been loved in return. Like their unborn child didn't exist. And Stella, seeing opportunity to reclaim everything she'd thrown away, moved immediately to fill the gaps in Jay's memory with carefully constructed lies about their reconciliation and renewed commitment to each other. The ghost who'd existed in Jay's mansion for 6 months had become an actual ghost, erased from his mind as thoroughly as if she'd never existed at all. Jay Martin's world after the accident was fragmentary reconstruction built on other people's testimonies about who he'd been and what he'd done during years he couldn't remember. Stella was constant presence. His wife, she claimed, who'd returned to him after brief separation and had been in process of rebuilding their marriage when the accident happened. The doctor said his memories might return eventually, or they might remain permanently locked behind walls his traumatized brain had constructed as protection mechanism. He accepted Stella's narrative because he had no alternative, because she provided continuity in life that otherwise made no sense. Because waking up with 3-year gap in your consciousness was terrifying enough without also questioning whether the people claiming to help you rebuild were lying about fundamental facts. But something felt wrong. Persistently, naggingly wrong in ways Jay couldn't articulate despite his usual precision with language. Stella fit into his space like puzzle piece that was almost but not quite the right shape, close enough to seem correct but just different enough to create constant friction. She knew details about his house, his business, his preferences and habits. But she didn't know him. Didn't understand the person he'd apparently become during those missing years. "Tell me about the past 3 years, Jay said one morning 6 months after the accident, when his frustration with the gaps in his memory had built to unbearable levels. "Really tell me. Not just facts about business deals or property acquisitions. Tell me about who I was, what I cared about, how I spent time when I wasn't working." "You worked constantly," Stella replied with ease of someone who'd rehearsed this narrative extensively. "Built your business into something even more successful than before. Maintained properties, made strategic investments, positioned yourself as one of the city's most influential power brokers. It was impressive to watch." "That's what I did professionally," Jay said. "What about personally? Did I have relationships? Friends? Connections beyond business transactions?" "You had me," Stella said, moving closer with possessive familiarity. "We were rebuilding what we'd lost, taking our time to ensure we did it right this time. You were focused on that, on us, which is why you lived fairly isolated existence. It worked for both of us." The explanation should have satisfied him. Should have provided the context he desperately needed. Instead, it made the wrongness feeling intensify until Jay couldn't ignore it anymore. I want to see my financial records, he said. All of them. Every transaction, every payment, everything that happened during those 3 years. Why? Stella asked, and Jay caught flash of something in her expression that might have been alarm. Because maybe seeing what I spent money on will trigger memories about what I was actually doing, Jay replied. Because something about your story doesn't fit with how my house feels, like someone else lived here, made it home in ways that have nothing to do with you. The financial records, when Jay's accountant finally provided them with obvious reluctance, told different story than Stella's carefully constructed narrative. There were payments to university for tuition and fees. Salary transfers to someone named Isabella Martinez for 6 months, 3 years ago. Purchase orders for furniture and decor that suggested feminine influence but not Stella's particular aesthetic preferences. And most tellingly, payment to medical facility for prenatal care, dated 8 months before the accident. Who is Isabella Martinez? Jay demanded that night, confronting Stella with printouts of transactions that contradicted everything she'd told him. And why was I paying for someone's prenatal care if you and I were supposedly rebuilding our marriage? I don't know who that is, Stella said too quickly. Probably employee, assistant, someone who worked for you temporarily. The prenatal care was probably charity. You were always generous with people who needed help. My accountant says Isabella Martinez lived at this address, Jay continued, his voice cold with the kind of controlled fury that came from recognizing he'd been systematically lied to. For 6 months. Which means someone was here, in my home, during period when you claim we were reconciling our relationship. I can explain, Stella started. Don't, Jay interrupted. Don't add more lies to foundation of deception you've apparently built during my memory loss. Just tell me the truth. Who was Isabella Martinez? What was she to me? And why have you been pretending she never existed? The truth, when Stella finally admitted it under pressure of Jay's escalating fury, was both better and worse than he'd imagined. Bella had been employee, that much was true. But she'd also been significantly more. Had been the woman Jay loved, the person who'd made his house feel like home, the relationship that had apparently been serious enough that he'd gotten her pregnant before the accident erased his memory of her completely. Where is she now? Jay demanded. I don't know, Stella admitted. She left before your accident. Disappeared. Changed her number and cut all connections. Your people tried to find her after you woke up, thought maybe seeing her would help with memory recovery, but she'd vanished completely. Jay spent the next week obsessively researching Isabella Martinez, pulling every available record, tracking every transaction, reconstructing timeline of their relationship from financial documentation and security footage his system had archived. What emerged was picture of connection that went far deeper than simple employment arrangement. They'd shared meals, conversations, clearly intimate relationship that Stella had systematically erased from his consciousness during recovery. He'd loved her. Was apparently still in process of building life with her when accident had stolen not just his memories but his entire future. And now she was gone, disappeared into anonymity while carrying child who would be nearly 2 years old if she'd carried the pregnancy to term. Find her, Jay ordered his head of security. I don't care what it costs or what resources it requires. Find Isabella Martinez. Find our child if it exists. And find out why she left before the accident happened. But tracking someone who deliberately disappeared proved challenging even with Jay's extensive resources. Bella had covered her tracks effectively. No social media presence, no employment records, no paper trail that would lead his investigators directly to her location. She'd vanished like she'd never existed, leaving only memories Jay couldn't access and evidence of relationship his damaged brain refused to remember clearly. Meanwhile, Jay's business world was destabilizing in ways that required immediate attention. Marcus Volkov, seeing opportunity in Jay's memory loss and distraction, had been systematically attacking his operations through financial pressure and strategic alliances designed to isolate Jay from support systems he'd built over years. The rivalry that had apparently led to public humiliation and escalating warfare was reaching critical point that required Jay's complete focus despite his desperate need to find Bella. The breakthrough came from unexpected source, Diego Santos, business associate who Stella had introduced as trusted ally during Jay's recovery. Diego claimed extensive connection to Jay's operations during missing years, offered assistance with Volkov's situation, positioned himself as friend who wanted to help Jay navigate complex business landscape during memory recovery. I might be able to help you find Isabella Martinez, Diego said during meeting about completely different matter. I have resources, connections and communities where people go when they want to disappear. If she's anywhere in the city, my people can locate her. Why would you help me with this? Jay asked suspiciously. Because I remember how you were with her, Diego lied smoothly. Remember how happy you were before the accident. And because finding her might help restore memories that would be beneficial to both of us. We had significant business together during those years, partnerships I'd like to resume now that you're recovering. What Jay didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have guessed given his memory loss, was that Diego had been Volkov's inside contact all along. That the man positioning himself as helpful ally was actually orchestrating systematic destruction of Jay's business while planning to use Bella as ultimate leverage once she was located. Bella, meanwhile, had rebuilt her life with methodical determination that came from recognizing she'd never be truly safe but could at least create illusion of stability. She'd reconnected with her biological father, man she'd barely known growing up but who'd reached out after her mother's death with genuine desire to build relationship with daughter he'd lost to contentious divorce decades ago. He'd provided safe place to live, support during her pregnancy, and helped her establish new identity that would make her harder to track by people who might want to use her as leverage against Jay. The baby, a girl she'd named Sophia, was now 18 months old, healthy and happy despite the complicated circumstances of her birth. Bella had found work as administrative assistant for small nonprofit, deliberately choosing employment that wouldn't require background checks that might trigger alerts in databases Jay's people would be monitoring. She'd built small, quiet life that was everything Jay's dangerous world wasn't. Stable, peaceful, boring in ways that felt like blessing after years of constant threat assessment. She'd told herself she was over him. Had convinced herself that their relationship had been product of trauma bonding and unusual circumstances rather than genuine connection. Had forced herself to believe that Jay was better off without her and their daughter, safer in life that didn't include Volkov's threats or rivals who would use family as leverage. She'd almost succeeded in believing the lies she told herself about being happy in her small, contained existence. Then her phone rang with number she didn't recognize, and she made catastrophic mistake of answering instead of letting it go to voicemail. Isabella Martinez? Jay's voice came through the speaker, and Bella felt her carefully constructed stability shatter with single word. Or do you prefer Bella? The records show both names and I'm trying to understand which one is actually you. Who is this? Bella asked though she knew. Would have recognized his voice anywhere despite time and distance. Jay Martins, he replied. Though I suspect you already knew that. I've been looking for you. Have questions about relationship we apparently had before accident erased my memory of everything we built together. The words hit Bella like physical blows. You don't remember me, she said, her voice hollow. No, Jay confirmed. Don't remember you, don't remember our relationship, don't remember apparently getting you pregnant before everything disappeared. But I want to. Need to. Because financial records and security footage and other people's testimonies about us suggest we had something significant, and I'd like to understand what I lost when my memories were stolen. Bella should have hung up. Should have maintained the distance she'd worked so hard to create. Should have protected herself and Sophia from man who'd already broken her heart once even if he couldn't remember doing it. I can't do this, she whispered. Can't be part of your life again, can't let you meet Sophia, can't risk everything I've built for memory you don't even have. I'm sorry, Jay. But we're done. We were done when I left and your accident doesn't change that. She disconnected before he could respond, before his voice could convince her to make choices she'd regret, before she could acknowledge how desperately she'd missed him despite everything. But the damage was done. The call had unlocked something in Jay's consciousness, not complete memories but fragments, feelings, the ghost of recognition that suggested his brain knew her even if his conscious mind didn't remember. He could feel her importance even without accessing specific memories of their time together. Could recognize on instinctive level that this woman mattered in ways that went beyond simple past relationship. That was her, he told his security team. That was Isabella Martinez. And something about her voice, the way she said my name. I know her. My brain knows her even if I can't remember how or why. Find her. Now. Before she disappears again. The trace on the call led Jay's people directly to Bella's location within hours. And simultaneously, Diego's people, who'd been monitoring Jay's investigation into Bella's whereabouts, mobilized to intercept her before Jay could reach her. Because what Diego wanted wasn't reunion between Jay and his lost love. What Diego wanted was leverage that would force Jay into complete submission to Volkov's organization. And Bella, with her daughter and her carefully constructed new life, was perfect leverage. The kidnapping happened fast, professionals grabbing Bella and Sophia from their apartment before either could scream, before neighbors could intervene, before Jay's security team that was en route could prevent the abduction. They were transported to warehouse and industrial district, secured with efficiency that suggested extensive planning, and presented to Diego with cold satisfaction of someone who just acquired winning piece in complicated game. "Call J. Martins," Diego ordered one of his subordinates. "Tell him we have his woman and his daughter. Tell him that if he wants to see either of them alive again, he'll transfer complete control of his operations to Volkov organization and withdraw from every territory that conflicts with our interests. He has 12 hours to decide whether his pride matters more than their lives." But Diego had made critical miscalculation. He'd assumed Jay's memory loss meant diminished capability, that man who couldn't remember his past would be hesitant to act with full force of his previous lethal competence. He'd forgotten that training and instinct didn't require conscious memory, that Jay had built his reputation on violence and strategic thinking that existed in muscle memory and tactical reflexes rather than simply conscious recollection. The message reached Jay while he was in his car, already heading toward Bella's location based on the phone trace. The rage that flooded through him when he heard that Diego had Bella and the daughter he'd never met was cold, focused, absolutely lethal in its intensity. This wasn't just business rivalry anymore. This was personal violation of the most fundamental kind, threatening what was his, what mattered, what his brain recognized as essential even without complete conscious access to memories. "Full tactical deployment," Jay ordered. "Everyone. Every resource. I want that warehouse surrounded, I want exits controlled, and I want Diego Santos alive so I can personally demonstrate what happens when people threaten my family." What followed was coordinated assault that demonstrated why J. Martins had remained powerful despite years of rivalry and business warfare. His people moved through industrial district with military precision, securing perimeter and neutralizing Diego's guards before primary assault even began. Jay led the main breach personally, his muscle memory guiding movements his conscious mind couldn't fully direct, his combat instincts operating independent of memories he couldn't access. The violence was brutal and efficient. Jay's people eliminated resistance with lethal force that left no room for mercy or negotiation. And when Jay finally reached the room where Bella and Sophia were being held, when he saw his daughter for the first time and recognized the woman he'd loved in photographs despite not remembering her clearly, something in his consciousness cracked. Memories flooded back. Not complete, not perfectly clear, but enough. Enough to remember Bella crashing into him, living in his home, loving him despite the danger. Enough to remember her pregnancy announcement, her departure, the grief that had consumed him before accident had stolen even that pain. Enough to recognize that the woman staring at him with mixture of terror and desperate hope was the other half of his soul regardless of what his damaged brain had forgotten. "Bella," he said, and her name on his lips triggered cascade of associations that brought more memories surging forward. "I remember. God, I remember you." He freed her and Sophia with hands that shook slightly despite his usual control, pulled them both against him with desperate relief, and felt something fundamental click back into place in consciousness that had been fractured since the accident. This was what had been missing. This woman, this child, this connection that his brain had been trying to remember through incomplete fragments and other people's testimonies. "You remember?" Bella whispered against his chest, her tears soaking through his tactical vest. "I remember everything that matters," Jay replied, though truthfully his memories were still fragmented and incomplete. "Remember loving you. Remember the pregnancy. Remember that I'm supposed to be protecting you and our daughter rather than letting enemies use you as leverage against me. I'm so sorry, Bella. Sorry I forgot you, sorry I let you leave, sorry for every moment of pain my failure caused." "Later," Bella said, pulling back to look at him directly. "We'll process everything later. Right now, your people said something about Diego Santos and betrayal?" "My second-in-command has been working with Volkov organization," Jay confirmed grimly. "Using my memory loss to position himself as trusted ally while systematically feeding information to my enemies. He thought having you and Sophia would force my complete surrender. He was wrong. Diego was captured during the assault, wounded but alive, exactly as Jay had ordered. What followed was interrogation that revealed extent of his betrayal, the partnerships he'd formed with Volkov, the systematic destruction of Jay's business he'd been orchestrating. And when Diego finally confessed everything, when he provided every detail about the conspiracy against Jay's operations, Jay delivered justice with the kind of cold precision that reminded everyone present why crossing him was terminal mistake. "Tell Volkov this is finished," Jay said over Diego's corpse. "Tell him that moving against my family was line he should never have crossed. Tell him that if he wants war, I'll give him war, but it will be last war he fights because I will absolutely destroy everything he's built." The message was delivered through channels that ensured Volkov understood the threat. And within weeks, the combination of Jay's restored focus and strategic retaliation broke Volkov's organization completely. Territories were reclaimed. Allies were secured. Every advantage Volkov had gained during Jay's memory recovery was systematically eliminated until the rivalry that had threatened Jay's empire was reduced to minor irritation rather than existential threat. But more important than business victories was personal reconciliation happening simultaneously. Jay and Bella spent weeks rebuilding connection that had been fractured by his memory loss and her necessary departure. He met Sophia properly, held his daughter, learned her habits, fell completely in love with the tiny person they'd created together. He apologized repeatedly for letting Stella manipulate his recovery, for not finding Bella sooner, for every moment of pain his failure had caused. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," Jay said during one of their long conversations about rebuilding trust. "Don't expect you to simply move back into my home and resume relationship like nothing happened. But I'm asking, begging if necessary, for chance to prove that the man I was with you is who I still am beneath the fragments and confusion. That our connection wasn't just memory I lost but fundamental truth about who we are together." "I never stopped loving you," Bella admitted. "Even when I was angry, even when I thought you'd chosen Stella over me, even when I believed you'd forgotten me completely, I never stopped loving you, Jay. But I can't go back to dangerous life where our daughter becomes leverage for your enemies. Can't accept constant threat assessment as normal existence." "Then I'll change," Jay said with conviction that suggested genuine commitment. "We'll transition my business into more legitimate operations. We'll eliminate gray area activities that make us targets. We'll build life where Sophia can grow up safe rather than constantly protected. Because having you both back is worth more than maintaining empire built on violence and risk." The transition took time. Months of careful restructuring, strategic withdrawals from dangerous operations, replacement of illegal revenue streams with legitimate business ventures. Jay's organization transformed from criminal enterprise operating in gray spaces into investment firm that was actually what it claimed to be. The change wasn't complete. Some connections couldn't be fully severed without triggering new conflicts, but it was significant enough that Bella felt safe bringing Sophia back into Jay's life permanently. They didn't rush into formal reunion. Took their time rebuilding trust, establishing new patterns, ensuring that whatever they built next would be stronger than what had been fractured by memory loss and manipulation. Jay proved repeatedly that his commitment to their family exceeded his attachment to power or criminal operations. Bella learned to trust again despite betrayals that had nearly destroyed her. And slowly, with patient determination, they built something that felt like actual future rather than temporary stability interrupted by inevitable crisis. The wedding happened 2 years after the warehouse rescue. Small ceremony with only close family and friends who'd supported them through recovery and reconciliation. Sophia was flower girl, delighted by her fancy dress and important role. Jay's vows included promise to protect without smothering, to choose family over empire whenever the two conflicted, to build life that was worth living rather than simply surviving. Bella's vows acknowledged the darkness they'd survived, the pain they'd endured, and the fundamental truth that some connections transcended memory loss and separation. That real love survived through actions rather than just feelings, through choice rather than simply circumstance. "From debt to destiny," Jay said during their first dance, his arms wrapped around Bella while Sophia danced nearby with her grandfather. "That's what we are. Started with you destroying my suit and ended with you completing my life in ways I didn't know were possible. I love you, Bella Martins. Love you with everything I remember and everything I forgot and everything I'll never forget again." "I love you too," Bella replied. "Even when I shouldn't. Even when logic says our relationship is impossible. Even when memory fails and circumstances separate us. Always." They'd started with collision that destroyed expensive suit. Had progressed through employment contract that blurred into love. Had survived violence, memory loss, betrayal, and systematic attempts to destroy what they'd built. Had emerged scarred but stronger, separated but ultimately reunited, their connection proved through every obstacle fate had thrown at them. The debt that bound them had transformed into choice. The contract had evolved into commitment. The danger had been tamed, not eliminated completely, but reduced to manageable levels rather than constant crisis. And the man who'd needed domestic presence to make his house feel like home had finally found what he'd actually been searching for. Family, love, connection that went deeper than any business transaction could capture. Jay and Bella Martins had built something worth protecting. Worth fighting for. Worth surviving impossible odds to preserve. And whatever challenges their future held, Whatever remnants of Jay's past emerged to threaten their hard-won stability, they would face it together. As partners. As equals. As people who'd chosen each other repeatedly through every circumstance that should have torn them apart. Some debts were paid in money. Some were paid in time. But the debt that had bound Jay and Bella together had been paid in something infinitely more valuable. Trust, sacrifice, and the kind of persistent love that refused to accept separation as final answer. They'd started as stranger and damaged criminal. Had become employer and employee. Had evolved into lovers and parents and eventually partners in every sense that mattered. And the house that had been empty museum when Bella first arrived was now filled with life and warmth and the sound of their daughter's laughter. Proof that even the most calculated arrangements could transform into something real when the people involved chose connection over convenience, love over logic, and each other over everything else the world tried to offer as substitute. Did their impossible love story leave you breathless? If Bella and Jay's journey from debt to destiny captured your heart, if you believe some connections transcend memory and circumstance, you're not alone in craving romance that goes deeper than surface attraction. Want more stories where love survives the impossible? Where trauma and memory loss and dangerous enemies can't destroy what's meant to be? Where the debt that binds becomes the choice that frees? Craving relationships that are tested by fire and emerge stronger? Stories where protection becomes possession, where employment contracts blur into genuine intimacy, where the line between dangerous and devoted is beautifully, terrifyingly thin? Let me know in the comments. Which moment hit you hardest? The memory loss? The betrayal? The reunion? Should there be a sequel following Sophia as she grows up in her parents' complicated world? What other Mafia romance tropes would you love to see explored with this level of emotional depth? Your engagement matters. Every like, comment, and share tells me you want more stories that honor the beautiful complexity of choosing love despite impossible odds. Subscribe now so you never miss another emotionally devastating, heart-pounding romance that proves real love survives even when memory fails and enemies attack and the world tries everything to tear two people apart. Hit that notification bell for weekly stories featuring morally complex heroes who protect fiercely and love desperately strong heroines who refuse to be broken by circumstance, slow burn tension that explodes into passionate commitment, danger that tests relationships and proves what really matters, happy endings earned through survival rather than given freely. Because the best love stories aren't about perfection, they're about choosing each other repeatedly through every circumstance that should tear you apart.